How does Paul cope with his symptoms worsening?
Is Liz gonna try and run everyone's life?
Will Alice and Jimmy ever agree on what forgiveness means to them?
And will Lewis ever be okay?
Red and Red Real Reviews explores some therapeutic life lessons with Apple TV's Shrinking, Season 2.
Ahoy, ladies! I didn't see you there. Would you guys like to set sail on this ocean of flavor?
Randall, look at eye contact. You're gonna be cool, right?
Oh, baby, I'm as cool as the other side of the pillow.
Staring at this board for days.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Act. Bears eat beets.
My brain is on fire. I'm dying.
I am the one who knocks.
Bears. Beets. Battlestar Galactica.
When they say 2% milk, I don't know what the other 98% is.
It's hard to believe we're even the same species.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Oh my god. The microchip has been compromised.
Dracarys.
And welcome back to another episode of Red and Red Real Reviews. So we're coming off a pretty recent Bill Lawrence run here. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, we just covered Bad Monkey in the past few months, which was a Bill Lawrence show. So, obviously we both watched Ted Lasso when it was on, which was another Bill Lawrence show. So what were your first impressions, now that we're in the second season of this show? What was your initial impression when you first started watching the first season?
I found it, I think, on a chance of luck, just because I was looking on Apple for something to watch, and I saw Jason Segel, which I was a pretty good fan of How I Met Your Mother way back when, so I'm familiar with him, and then of course Harrison Ford. That everyone knows Harrison Ford, of course, Indiana Jones and Han Solo and all that. It didn't take much for it to catch my eye. And then once it got going, it kind of had that like typical. It wasn't necessarily. Maybe it's just because there's no Vince Vaughn. Like if I'm comparing it to Bad Monkey, it wasn't really the dry humor. It was a little more slapsticky of sorts.
I think I would. I mean, obviously it's a different subject matter, but I would compare it more to the feel of Ted Lasso, just because it has that like even parts comedy, even parts drama. And Ted Lasso really had that heart, which we'll talk about later. And we'll talk about the funny stuff. I wrote down a million quotes. I was like, I can't just go through every single one, every single thing. I thought that was funny. So I think what a lot of that is, to be honest, is, well, it was co-created by Bill Lawrence, Jason Segel, and Brett Goldstein. Brett Goldstein, I know, is very important. He's the kind of the core of the writing team, I believe, and he acts in it, which we'll talk about in a sec too. So yeah, I think maybe what that kind of humor is you're really kind of hearing from Brett Goldstein and his writing coming through in there.
Yeah, and he's kind of like the dry humor of whatever crew he's part of. Even Ted Lasso, which like Jason Sudeikis is a little bit more of a silly type of funny actor, and Brett Goldstein is more that dry. Now it's also the Roy Kent. Like the Roy Kent character is dry and deadpan and super serious, so the dry humor works with him as opposed to it probably wouldn't work with Jason Sudeikis. And there's kind of a similar comparison there between Brett Goldstein and Jason Segel. Jason Segel kind of being more of a silly, funny actor too.
Yeah, and I think you hear it with all the characters, like it kind of has the same tone to it, although the actors do it differently. Like Jessica Williams, who plays Gabby, and Jason Segel, and I forget the actor who plays Brian, but they all have the same tone, like just sort of that kind of pointing out like the awkward or weird thing and making a joke about it. Like that's kind of what Brett Goldstein's humor seems to be. Like a good example of that is, I think it was Jimmy and Gabby were having a conversation in the kitchen at work, and Gabby was making like an English muffin or something, and she was going to storm out of the room, but her English muffin was ready, or she was like putting butter on it or doing something. And so they had this whole thing of like, oh, well, I was going to storm out of the room, but my English muffin wasn't done, or like just having that like kind of awkward humor about pointing out what is awkward about what's going on right now. That seems to kind of be a common thing, like just to point out those quirks, those funny
And
moments.
and even Harrison Ford too. There was one I didn't write it down later, but I did write it down in my notes. Um, when he and Alice do their little bench meetings in the
Yeah.
park, and she's supposed to bring in the candy, and like one time early on, she brings him a bag of carrots or something. It was like, carrots, what is this? And she's like, oh, I googled targets, and he goes like, fucking hate the internet. So like even Harrison Ford does that too, where he like makes the very obvious joke to call out the situation.
Right. And he just does it in like his Harrison Ford way, and Jessica Williams does it in her like kind of flustered Gabby way, like, oh, like, kind of
Yeah.
fast talking. Like they all have their way of putting forth Brett Goldstein's humor. So obviously I want to talk too about the fact that one of the core characters, Liz, who is played by Krista Miller, I didn't even know that that was her name. She's another Bill Lawrence person. And I remember us talking about this show through messages, and I think I kind of pointed out to you, or I said something like, oh, well, Liz looks really familiar. I'm like, is she from
Hmm.
Scrubs, or what is she from? I kind of made a reference to the fact that I think she is from another Bill Lawrence show, and I knew that Scrubs was in his repertoire. Repertoire? I don't know how to say that.
Repertoire.
I don't do French.
Oui,
But
oui.
yeah, oui. So, yeah, you kind of pointed out, I was kind of questioning whether her face looked different. And obviously, I mean, Scrubs was on
Oh.
probably what, 25 years ago at
Yeah,
this
little
point?
older. Little
Yeah, so I
older.
guess she is a little bit older. I don't know if I should have been so rough on her for being like, oh, well, she definitely got work done to her face. Maybe she didn't. Maybe it's just aging.
Yeah, I mean I could now I could be wrong. Maybe she did. Maybe she did have work done, but I thought she looked fairly comparable to her younger self, just as an older version. So I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't have any work done and she just aged a little gracefully.
Yeah, it's possible. And she was sort of I mean, I didn't watch every episode of Scrubs, but I, would watch it every once in a while. Wasn't she sort of I mean, I guess I don't want to say abrasive, but wasn't she sort of a like a psycho wife?
She was a puppet master. She was always trying to get in Dr. Cox's head just to screw with him.
Mm,
And then like like when she first came on, she she messed around with JD because she knew that was going to screw with him as his protege. And then like several episodes later, she was back in the sack with Dr. Cox. So she was very much the kind of a manipulative puppet master.
yeah. And I mean, I remember her being sort of a rough character,
Hmm.
but she's a lot more likable in this, and we'll talk about which characters we like the most in a little bit.
Yeah.
So um with this being the second season of the show, the characters are already pretty well established. It's just a continuation of the feelings we had about them the first time, but we did get a few new guest stars this season. So the familiar faces we saw, I think it was in the first episode of the second season, Brett Goldstein. We This was the first time that we saw him, and they actually didn't call him by name for a
A
few
long
episodes.
time.
Yeah, because I kept writing down DD. I kept writing down like for drunk driver
Yeah.
to let myself know who he was. And I didn't refer to him by name. So obviously once that was revealed, I kept writing Lewis, but obviously I knew that Brett Goldstein was a writer on this show, and when they showed his face and that he was the drunk driver that killed Tia, Jimmy's wife, I was like, "Whoa." I was like, "Yes, we get more Brett Goldstein on camera."
Roll. He's here. He's there. He's every fucking where. Roll a can. Roll a can.
I love Roy Kent. So, I mean, him having a drunk driver character, I was like, oh,
Hmm.
this is going to be
Yeah,
rough, but
sensitive nature.
sensitive topic, and he's likely going to be a very dramatic character because there's this whole backstory of how that happened. So,
And he added a certain amount of depth to that. And like, it's funny how he's kind of only existed, his career has only existed in these comedic roles because in this, you see, like, for someone with as little dialogue and relatively small screen
mm,
time as the character Lewis does, he- like, you see the emotion he portrays. Like, he is really torn not only by the consequences of his actions, but also um, how he's trying to live with regaining forgiveness from Jimmy and Alice.
yeah, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen him do the serious parts of Roy Kent too. I mean, Roy Kent has made me cry, I'll say it. So,
Mm.
I mean, it's surprising for being like I'm pretty sure he's a full-fledged comedian and a writer. He does a great job of dramatic acting. So it's kind of nice to see him flex that muscle and to do it so well.
Were you sensitive to your kitty fucking Jones?
I just loved Roy Kent. So I when I saw Brett Goldstein pop up, I was like, yes, another one. We've got another one. And another one, another guest star that was a pretty big deal was Colby Smulders, who
Mhm.
is Jason Segel's co-star from How I Met Your Mother. So she plays a woman that Jimmy kind of flirts with and then famously is regretting not getting her number or following up with her. And he buys a car from her, a Mini Cooper specifically for Alice. And it was really only one episode, a little part of it that she was in, but I actually really liked that interaction. I did watch How I Met Your Mother when it was on. Again, I didn't watch every single episode. There were parts of it that kind of annoyed me. Just the fact that I felt like it at times that show was trying too hard. It was trying too hard to be like Friends, like trying to have unique, specific things to it. And in How I Met Your Mother, I found, all of their acting can be very like cheesy. But in
Mhm.
this, and I've seen Colby Smulders and other things too, and I actually found out that I just didn't like her acting. I didn't like the way that she was acting with her character in How I Met Your Mother. When I see her in anything else, like I love her in anything else. And I loved her in this. And that was kind of interesting to see obviously in How I Met Your Mother, Jason Segel is married to Allison Hannigan. So
Yeah.
like Robin, who is Colby Smulders, like they never had a romantic relationship in How I Met Your Mother. So that was kind of fun to have that in this, like have them that little flirting thing between them.
Yeah, and I thought you could tell that they had done a show of 7 seasons together
Yeah,
because they did have a very natural chemistry in
a
that
comfort.
interaction when Jimmy buys the car from her.
Even though it was supposed to be an awkward scene where they're kind of saying what they shouldn't say, she's talking about her ex-husband or something, and
Yeah,
like this is your first time meeting this person, and they're just like unloading kind of all of their stuff, and it's supposed to be super awkward, but they were it was just so smooth for being an awkward situation. Like they had obvious chemistry, I think.
yeah. When he says when he drops the like guy with the dead wife joke, and she like doesn't bat an eye, and he's like, oh, normally that doesn't go off as smoothly. And then what did she say? She's like, oh well, I wish my husband's dead too. And then the awkward pause, and she goes like, he's dead to me. He's just dead to me.
Yeah, yeah, that was funny. I wrote down a couple of those exchanges because that was a good moment. Like I hope that we'll get into later what our hopes are for the third season, but if there is a third season, if it's picked up, which I hope it is. But I wonder if we'll ever see her again, her character.
I would hope so because it was just like that one scene, and then I think at one point, maybe in the next episode, they were either texting or he took a phone call from her or something. But other than that, there was nothing else. Um,
I think she
so
did text him. Didn't she ask him like how'd the car
how the
go or
car went, yeah,
how did your daughter like the car or
hmm
something like that? Yeah, so I
yeah,
hope that continues where he gets the chance to, oh well, I didn't call that girl like I should have and I just kind of it was a missed opportunity. Like I hope it becomes something.
yeah, and it's nice to see her getting other roles that aren't like the cheesy acting. Cheesy
Mm.
comedy roles because other than that, the only other thing I think off the top of my head is the Avengers movie. So it's nice to see her still working as opposed to just taking the royalty checks from Avengers airing on repeat on TNT every other week.
Yeah, and I think she can do it. Like she can do the the dramedies. Like I think she's very capable of she's very likable when she's on screen when she's not in How I Met Your Mother like that just I don't want to say slapstick but that just that like it's a different style of acting, isn't it?
It's funny how you think How I Met Your Mother was too cheesy, but Friends wasn't.
Friends had its moments too, don't get me wrong, but I just one thing that stands out is like the whole like slaps giving thing that they were trying to make a thing. I'm just like, what? Like, this isn't even funny. It's just stupid.
Well, it recurred for like 3 or 4 seasons, so
Yeah.
it was definitely a thing.
Like I just kept feeling like stop trying to make slaps giving a thing. It's not a thing. Um, and speaking of another beloved show, Derek number two, who is Liz, Derek's husband, friend, really good friend that he introduces to Gabby, or we call him Other Derek. It's spelled differently than the Derek we know. He is Coach from New Girl.
Yeah, I thought they called him D2 in the show in the season as well. Didn't they call him D2?
Yeah, I think they were like Gabby or some of the other characters might have been kind of trying out like nicknames, and they might have said that, like, oh, hey, D2. Oh, I'm just trying it, like they would try to drum up nicknames for him. So he played a love interest for Gabby this season, which is kind of interesting to me. Like, yes, they did address the fact that, Gabby was sort of hurt by Jimmy, like the fact that they were hooking up and kind of hurt by their relationship. And they did acknowledge that. And then there was that whole joke with Derek, how Gabby took him aside and said, "Oh, make sure you feel like you come off that you're threatened by Jimmy because we want to make him feel better about himself or something." And he was playing along with it, and I thought that was really funny. But other than that, it was sort of like the Jimmy thing was dropped. I'm like, this like took like the first season, this took up a big chunk of the first season, and then they just kind of dropped it like a hot potato, right?
Yeah, like they're not like they're two people that had a relationship prior to Tia's passing because she was Tia's best friend. So all of a sudden they sleep together, but now they're not sleeping together. But you expect us to believe that there's no um, kind of tertiary feelings or lingering emotions after that.
Well, that's what it seemed like. It seemed like they really cared for each other. And then I guess the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, maybe they did drop it because Jimmy's going through stuff, and maybe they kind of are chalking it up to the fact that, listen, we were both going through this thing with my friend dying, your wife dying. We really just leaned on each other, and that's why this happened. Like maybe they kind of found out their feelings weren't really as strong as they thought, or it was just sort of a comfortable thing, a crutch, like it wasn't really like love, I guess. But yeah, it was kind of I did have this moment when I'm writing up my notes for this that I was like, oh, they kind of dropped that Jimmy thing real quick and just kind of inserted Derek in.
Yeah, and I I like D2's character, especially towards the end, because at first they were playing him up just to kind of be like Gabby's boy toy, but then
Yes.
towards the end they kind of added a little more depth to him because
Yes.
it became obvious that he was the one that wanted to be more serious, and Gabby was the
Mm-hmm.
one that couldn't get out of her own head to let that happen.
Yeah, and I really liked that arc for him. It was funny because I really thought that the banter he had with Gabby and Jessica Williams, the actress, was they had great chemistry and playing off of each other. And it was a lot of, yeah, it was a lot of comedy and unseriousness between them. But then towards the end, you could see the look on his face when she's talking to Alice about, oh yeah, like I don't usually break up with people. I just let them break up with me. Like I just let it get really bad. And you see the look on his face and he's kind of
Yeah,
taken aback by that.
they
And you
they
feel,
did make a very obvious camera ISO
yeah.
on him when she said that.
Yeah, and so you realize that he's that kind of sets off alarm bells in his head and he's like, "Oh shit." So yeah. So the way that the last couple episodes went down with her inviting him to Thanksgiving and that whole thing, I wasn't really sure how that was going to turn out, but he did end up having more depth and I think he's another one. He does the comedy great. He also does the dramatic scenes really well.
And I have maybe like I do have a soft spot for the actor, and maybe that's just because like I thought he fit into the New Girl cast so well as Coach, and then when he kind of like left the show and they brought Wilson in, Wilson, excuse me, Winston. Uh, Winston kind of was this very awkward and he wasn't likable right away, so it kind of left a void from the audience's perspective, missing Coach.
Yeah, and Coach was a very like cool character. He was a basketball player and he
Hmm.
was the same in this too. You know, he comes in as Derek is like, "Oh, this is my friend. His name is also Derek." And they're like, "Oh, wow, he's good looking." And
Yeah.
he's kind of like the cool new guy and he ended up being a very similar character to Coach from New Girl, but I did like the fact that he had more depth. You know, he was very likable in the end. He wasn't just like a narcissist who you're like, oh, that guy, he's just so full of
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah. Which he could have been the way they built up D2. He could have been, but they didn't do that.
Yeah. Now speaking of building up characters, who's your favorite character or is there a character that you relate to most?
My favorite, I find Brian absolutely hysterical, and I think he is so like, if you were to define an on-screen character as extra in the dictionary, that would be Brian because he, but he embraces it. Like it's his destructive tendencies that I almost think are a balancing act to Jimmy, who's a nervous wreck half the time. Um, so I think the two of them being best friends is a very, for lack of a better word, attractive dynamic on the screen. That one is so off the wall, and he's just
Yeah.
going with it all the time. Uh,
They balance
'Cause-
each other out. Like it's because Brian is so like I would say he's a little bit like bitchy, but
mhm.
it's funny though, like because he's kind of like sassy, and then you have Jimmy who's a little bit more of a straight man who's just kind of awkward and like a very heterosexual man who I think there's a part where Brian feels like Jimmy, like they're not as close as they used to be. And he asks, what's my sign? And Jimmy's like, Capricornus? Like, I
I wrote
don't
that down
know.
actually.
I did
Aquarius.
too.
Yeah.
But that's like what's funny is that they're such different people, but they balance each other out because Brian's just all over the place and he's very eccentric. And then you have Jimmy, who's, a therapist and very into feelings and asking other people their feelings, but listening more. So it's a weird
And
dynamic they have as friends.
despite the fact that Jimmy has to be more be more intuitive as far as emotions, his delivery is so direct. So
Mm.
it's that's also a I don't want to say contradiction, but an opposite to Brian's kind of dancing around, like he's a bit more subtlety in the way he delivers things.
Yeah, and he wants to avoid stuff for sure. Like even
Hmm.
just the whole baby thing
The
with
kid,
Charlie,
yeah,
he's kind of like, I know this is what he wants. I'm nervous about it. I don't know how to feel, but I don't know what to say. Like he's very much wanting to avoid certain things and he'll just back away and not deal with it. And Jimmy, I think, is like, no, we got to deal with this. We have to deal with whatever this is.
yeah, and especially when they're meeting with the baby's mother, and he's like so freaked out, so he all of a sudden he just starts ripping off, and he's like being super serious and saying all the good things, and all of a sudden he looks at Charlie, he's like, "Why are you not gripping my arms? Why aren't you stopping me?" He says, "Because you're doing great." But I do kind of relate to Brian a little bit because I know when I'm like out and about and I get into the mood of wherever I am, I'm kind of a bit more fluid
Mm.
socially than I would be right away or in a one-on-one interaction. So I kind of can relate to the whole chaos. A little bit of chaos winds up being your comfort zone.
Mm. Yeah, he's a little bit chaotic, but he gets excited about certain things, and that's
Hmm.
I can see a little bit of that excitability. So you like Brian most, but you said you relate most to a different character.
Yeah, I would say if anything, I probably relate most to Sean.
Mm.
Um, he's he has this very entrepreneurial spirit. Um, so he's outgoing, but he's soft spoken. He reminds me of the term gentle giant.
Mm.
But he's also extremely observant, and I've always liked to consider myself as an observant person because I've kind of had to be as far as being out in society and having to pay attention to people to kind of mask my own insecurities or whatever the case may be. Um, and I feel like Sean is very observant with both Jimmy and Paul because which is ironic because they're the ones that are supposed to be helping him with his
Mm.
post traumatic stress coming out of the military. And the fact that he sees what Paul is doing, where he puts up the gruff exterior, where he's trying to be the guy that helps everyone, but in reality, he's the one that kind of needs the most help. So
Mm.
he kind of observes and feeds off of that, and kind of is a little bit of a soft landing spot when Paul kind of goes off the handle. And then when Jimmy gets into his eccentric mode, where he's kind of like self sabotaging and stuff, Sean's kind of a stable rock because he's had to keep his emotions so in check without losing his own cool that he kind of winds up being a support brace for Jimmy to kind of fall into it a couple points.
Yeah, he's very down to earth.
Hmm.
Just very even keeled, down to earth. He's also a foodie. Well, he has a food
Yeah,
truck, so
that's true. That's it. That's always easy to relate to.
yeah, so he has that. I don't know if I relate most to Derek, Liz's husband, not D2. But I it might be kind of unexpected for me, but Derek for some reason is my favorite character, and I don't know that I really relate to him. I just think he's hilarious.
I'm
Um
very surprised by that because to me, he's such a tertiary character as far as when you start like listing them all out in the show.
he just I don't know if it's so like he has the part to him that he's really sweet and he really knows his wife, and like that's what's sort of hilarious about it. They have their moments and their routine, and the part where she's being so nice to him after the affair, and he's like, I just want her to like yell at me, and then when she finally does, he's like, I this is all I wanted. Like that's so funny because it seems so dysfunctional, but like that's what he's used to and that's what he needs and that's what he expects in their relationship. And he's got that sweet side of him, but also the things he comes out with sometimes like are just so random. It just kind of reminds me of my own husband, where I literally will say like, where did you get that? Like just the things he says sometimes, I'm like, they come out of nowhere. So, uh,
I
just
thought
yeah.
with Derek, the part that added depth to Derek for me was when he went to confront Liz's friend that owns the
Yes.
brewery, and you're thinking like he's gonna walk here and punch this guy in the face,
Yeah.
or at least like rip into him with 60 expletives every other sentence. Um, and he goes into him, and one he offers him the beer, and he's like, "Wow, this is really good." And then he turns around and he sees all of Liz's artwork. At least I assume all the dog pictures were Liz's artwork.
Yes.
He sees all of them on the wall, and all of a sudden it dawns on him like, as mad as I was almost like as mad as I am at her for doing this, I never gave her any feedback or any encouragement towards her
Support.
passion. So all of a sudden it like dawns. I'm like, oh, I get this now. I screwed up. I created the environment where she screwed up.
And I love the fact that he just quietly notices things, like he recognizes, she kind of has this moment this season of not really knowing what her purpose is and just kind of feeling useless and not knowing what she should do. And he's the one who recognizes that her strength is being a mom. She's
Hmm.
raised three boys and that's what she's good at. And so then I like the fact that he's supporting her being a nanny to Brian and Charlie's kid. And then but then it's like, so there's moments like that are really sweet where he's really supporting his wife. And then there's just those WTF moments where like I'm thinking of when they're about to head over to Thanksgiving at Gabby's, and there's one of the sons, the older sons, is sitting at the table, and he has Liz makes a comment like, "Why do you have a fuckboy hat on?" or something, and
Put the hat back.
so
It's fine.
yeah. So then Derek is just like, he's like, come on, let's go. And he's like, take off my hat. Like just so
Yeah.
then you find out that that hat is Derek's. And it's just one of those WTF moments where you're like, he's so weird, but it's so funny. And I wrote down when they're going for a hike, Brian, Liz, and Derek's coming along,
Mm.
and I think Brian is like, Derek, why are you eating a funnel cake? We're going hiking. Like, what are you doing? And he's got powdered sugar all over his face. And Liz is just like, oh, let him do it. He wanted one. It's just like who has, I mean, for us, it's fried dough. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Well, hey, when you're going on a hike, you gotta have carbs and sugar to burn off. So, there's probably a method to his madness.
Yeah. Um, so, obviously we could have written down every single quote in this season of this show. It's just obviously it could be considered a dramedy, but I think that it skews more comedy. Like, not to say it doesn't have those heartful, uh, heartfelt moments, but there's a shit ton of comedy. And what were the funniest moments or highlights for you of this season?
It's like 60-40, 70-30 comedy. It's definitely more majority. Probably even more so than I would even say Bad Monkey was. Well, that's not true. Bad Monkey was like 80-20.
Yeah, definitely. Like when I think of another dramedy, which The Bear is nominated usually for comedy
Mm,
awards, and that doesn't really skew comedy to me.
no, that's like 75-25 drama.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I could have. I like when I even when I was writing them down, when I was writing notes down, I kept like I tend to like try to leave a couple pages because I figure I'll just write enough for throughout the course of the season, and I filled those up so fast, and I would have to go back and find a blank page to fill it in. I think I wrote down more notes for this, a comedy, than I did for probably most, if not everything else we've reviewed.
Well, it's just every line is like a pop culture reference or a joke that's funny. There's a
Hmm.
million of them.
Yeah, I liked one of them that I liked was after Sean gets in the brawl and they all go to visit him in the hospital. He's like, "Oh, it's my favorite band, Gabby and the White Saviors."
Oh, that's when he was all hopped up on meds, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember
yeah.
that.
When he was, wasn't he in like his honesty? He had like an honesty hour because of the
Mm.
medications. I forgot who he called. He called somebody out. I forgot who he called out. It was
Yeah,
either,
he had
was
a
it
he
Alice?
was
He
he
called Alice
oh
out for something.
he was roasting Brian. Wasn't he roasting
Oh,
Brian?
maybe. Okay.
He was roasting everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, I think he did like go boom, boom, boom down the line. I think he said something pretty expository about Alice, though. I don't remember what it was though.
Yeah, could be. He really stuck it to everyone when he was all hopped up on drugs.
Yeah, I like, and one of them was it's not necessarily a quote, but I think it was when um Jimmy is really frustrated at Brian and Alice for talking to Lewis, and like Brian to like distract him and calm him down, he does like the big bear clap, and Jimmy's like, "Whoa, what the, like my bear clap? It actually worked."
Oh yeah.
I thought that was a good one. Um, and one I thought was funny. Another one I thought was funny was when Jimmy gives Alice the Mini Cooper, and she's all happy. It's like, "Oh, it's just like mom's." And he goes like, "Well, not exactly, because we didn't make you in this one." I'm like, "What father says that to their child?"
Oh, no kid wants to hear that.
Yeah. Um. When Gabby is confiding to Liz and Jimmy because she screwed up with D2, and Liz is trying to be the supportive friend because for some reason there's this weird friendship goals with Liz and Gabby. Um, and she goes and Jimmy, I forget what Jimmy says, but Jimmy says something that like probably like faux pas in this context. And she's like, "Did you not see my shut the fuck up look?" And
Yeah.
he's like, "In my defense, Liz, you always have that look."
I liked that one
Uh,
too.
and then when Jimmy finally has his big breakdown with Alice at the end where he says, I've been so where he tells her the reason why he's been so out on out on third base is because he's petrified that he broke his promise to Tia that he was going to be there for Alice.
Mm.
And Alice, she tries to comfort him like you're the best dad. You've always been there for me. You taught me Spanish. You tried to teach me Spanish, even though I was terrible at it because mom didn't have the patience for me. And she spits out a sentence in Spanish, and Jimmy just looks at her. He goes, "You just said I'm an eggplant," and she just mouths back. I was like, "Well, I never said I was good at it."
And then he says like te amo or like he
Yeah,
says I love you and she's like you assume that I know what you said. I just said I wasn't good at it. And he's like,
yeah.
"Yeah, I don't know what I was doing."
Yeah, it's like bad decision on my part.
Yeah,
Strange
and
decision on my
we both wrote down the same one that a Lewis quote, which is I can just guarantee this is from Brett Goldstein, like right out of
part.
his
Oh, I
head
thought
and
this
right
was
out of his
so
mouth.
funny.
So
Yeah.
when he's telling Alice about his plans for Friendsgiving, he's kind of saying, like she asks him, "Oh, well, do you have plans for Thanksgiving?" And he's like, "Brits don't need a special day to celebrate stealing land from people. To us, that's every day."
And I thought that the reason I cracked up so much of that is because I'm like, oh gosh, here's typical Hollywood left wing. They're making fun of an American holiday, that sort of thing. And then he comes back and he makes it about England and British colonialism and stuff. I just died. I thought that was so funny to
It was
like to
pretty
like
good.
play with my my cynical sense.
Yeah, that was, I'm not gonna, obviously I didn't want to attempt it in a English accent. That wasn't gonna do that. I had just a couple like kind of awkward moments. So there's the moment where Paul kind of takes D2 aside about his intentions with Gabby. And so he kind of corners
Oh,
him, and Derek's like, "What? Are
mhm.
we in an old movie or something?" And he's like, "What? I'm a good guy. I recycle, even, batteries, which are a bitch to get rid of." And he's trying to give examples of how he's a good guy and like he's not going to hurt Gabby and all this stuff. And it's just funny that that's the way that he's trying to show that he's a good guy. The fact that he recycles batteries.
If Paul
Um,
said something back to him, but that got me laughing, but I forgot what it was.
there were, yeah, that's the problem is like when I would go to write down a quote, there'd always be like a response to that was funny, but I just did
Hmm.
not have time to get the whole conversation like back at the banter. I didn't have time to get all the
Hmm.
banter down. Um, And then another moment I thought was really funny is Alice decides she's going to go to this party and she's, you know, saying this guy Dylan is going to come to pick her up. So Jimmy is just right off the bat so awkward with him. He keeps like kind of commenting on how like good looking this guy is and how, oh wow, like you're 17 or you're 18, you don't look like it. And kind of remarking about what an adult he looks like. Oh, you look like a full-grown man and all this stuff. I think he comments on his facial hair or something like that. And then the situation ends with Jimmy choking on a grape, and this kid that's just meeting him has to do the full-on Heimlich maneuver. And Alice walks in and is just like, what is going on? And it's just such an awkward moment.
I thought I almost wrote it down too because I had a quote from that same scene when Alice and Dylan leave, and he looks at Sean and it's like he's gonna hold it over my head for the longest time that he saved my life to have sex with Alice, isn't he? And
Yes.
Sean goes, I would.
Yes. That was awesome. I loved that. I thought it was so funny.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, I mean, we could go an hour or two going back and forth with funny quotes, but you know, this show does do comedy really well, but it also has plenty of heart. It does drama very well too. I know in the last few episodes, I was ugly
They
crying like no
ratcheted it
other.
up. They ratcheted it up in the last two episodes.
Oh dang. Yeah,
Yeah.
going for those award noms, huh?
Hmm.
Yeah, what were some of the more touching moments that stood out to you?
One was to me Paul and Jimmy. Because
Mm,
they are even going back to season one, they are always at odds with each other over the best way to help their patients. Because does not, Paul is very against showing vulnerability,
hmm
both to his patients and just with himself in general. Uh, and Jimmy obviously is someone that always wants to really connect with the patient. And at one point, I don't know whether this was more of a Jason Segel going for the Globe moment or Harrison Ford going for the Globe moment. But
Mm,
when Paul compares himself to Jimmy, which is kind of mind blowing in itself because Paul is always distancing himself from Jimmy. Whenever Jimmy says we're the same person, Paul's like,
yeah.
absolutely not. Um, and he compares Jimmy to him because they both fear their failures they had with their daughter. And of course,
Mm,
Paul's sitting there in a very hindsight is 2020 because his daughter's on the other side of the country and a fully grown woman with a family of her own.
Hmm.
And obviously, Jimmy's daughter is still an adolescent. So that to me, not only from a full circle perspective as far as each character's arc, but just like the emotion that Harrison Ford's putting out to Jason Segel in that scene is just kind of like that one to me felt heavy.
There were, yeah, in the last couple episodes, there was a few interactions between them that were very heavy, but it was just sort of, Paul knowing Jimmy so well, he was like, okay, well,
Hmm.
you're gonna need me, you're gonna need to call me.
And
And
you better call me.
right. And he's like, I know that you're going to spiral out of control. When you do, you're going to call me. I hope you call me. And he's like, because we can't have what happened before. Like we can't have this again. So the moment where um Jimmy calls up that old hooker or whatever, and he's asking, I think, to for her to come over or for her friends to come over. I think he's also asking for drugs, isn't he?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he's
he
like full spiral, full spiral.
Yeah, so he calls her up and she's like, "Oh, I don't do that anymore, but I can call you back, or if you call me back, I'll give you the name of someone who does, the name of my friend or something." And so he kind of hangs up the phone, and then we see him pick up the phone and it looks like he's in the park on the bench. So we're like, phew, we're like,
Oh, Paul.
is he
Yeah.
calling who we think he's calling? And
Hmm.
thankfully he is. But, there were a couple scenes of him like walking around town, just like looking really distraught. So you're kind of worrying, like, is he gonna call this chick back and get back into partying? Is he gonna get into drugs and drinking? Or, then he calls Paul and Paul is there in the park and he says, I told you you'd call. And when he was like, I'm not okay, Paul, I was just like, oh my God. And I think that's how the episode ended. I was just like, oh my God, I was like, I can't deal with this, guys. Stop doing this, please.
And it's I like to me those scenes hit a little harder when they're actors that don't necessarily have that type of cinematic history. Like
Mm,
Jason Segel is like you think of How I Met Your Mother, you think of Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Like he doesn't have a lot of serious work behind him. So when you see
no,
him for the in like the first for the first time in a real moment on screen, it kind of hits a little harder. And likewise, Harrison Ford, we're used to Star Wars, we're used to Indiana Jones, we're used to The Fugitive, kind of high end CGI type of blockbusters and action thrillers. We're not used to, high emotional gravity.
yeah, and I mean it's nice to see Jason Segel recognized being nominated for like a Golden Globe
Mm-hmm.
for Best Actor because we're not used to him doing that, but he does it very well. And the same could be said for Harrison Ford. I remember the first season I watched. I think I was maybe 3 or 4 episodes into the first season before I was like, okay, I'm into this show now. It
Mm-hmm.
took me sort of a while, but actually what I think made me like the show was Harrison Ford, surprisingly.
Yeah.
I didn't really expect him to shine that much on a TV show because we're used to him being a big blockbuster star. So I mean, for me, it was initially, all the scenes in the first season where Gabby was driving him to work and he's singing along to the songs. There was, one of those moments in this season, but we really saw, obviously, he's got a sense of humor to him as the character of Paul, but seeing that, seeing the onion layers kind of being peeled away and him revealing his feelings, which he doesn't like to do.
Oh
His speech
yeah.
at Thanksgiving, that was another one, like especially seeing which I'm assuming Jessica Williams didn't have to act too much. She was probably just like captivated by his performance in that scene and probably like legitimately ugly crying like we all were watching
Yeah.
it. But when he's talking about saying how he's a lucky guy, he doesn't know how long he has, but he knows that everyone in that room is going to help get him through it. And he's obviously his life is on the line. He feels like his meds are wearing off, like he doesn't know what one day what he's dealing with now is just gonna cease to exist. Like he's not gonna be able to work anymore. Just the the most mundane tasks are going to be difficult or impossible to do with the
Well,
Parkinson's.
when he said he was off his meds at the party because he didn't want all his friends to see
Right.
him in a position so vulnerable that he needed to rely on them, and like he's like his voice is breaking down while he's telling them all that.
Yeah. That was a really, I was like, please just give him the award. Please.
Yeah, no,
Please just give this man the award. And then man, the other thing that destroyed me was Lewis.
hmm
So the whole moment at the end with his friend saying, "Listen, you didn't really mention that you had killed
oh,
someone."
hmm
And then so I literally wrote
hmm
down in my notes, I was like, shit, they're all putting their phones in the basket. I'm like, he's going through this rough time. He's going to text Alice and say, I need someone to talk to, and her phone is going to be in the basket. And then I'm like, oh my God, is he gonna jump in front of the train? Like he really looked like he was gonna jump in front of the train when he
I thought he
was
was gonna.
he
I for sure thought that's what's gonna happen. That's how the season's gonna end.
he literally, and then like Alice is gonna feel guilty because she didn't answer her
hmm
phone or she wasn't there. So that's all I could see happening. I knew something bad was gonna happen. And then all of a sudden we see Jimmy show up like
Yeah,
out of nowhere, and he makes a funny little comment about like, oh man, well I knew my daughter was addicted to her phone, but I didn't know she was that addicted to her phone. I mean,
yeah.
damn, like so he makes that funny little comment, and then he has that was a really good interaction between Jimmy and Lewis where he says like, you know what, I am here for Tia, I'm here for Alice, but mostly I'm here for me. And then what's kind of interesting is I don't know that well, we don't know as an audience that Alice has told Jimmy the situation of how Lewis and his fiance used to go to the train station and like people watch and say, "Oh, what do you think that person's story is?" or "What do you think that person does for work?" Like Jimmy didn't know that, and it's like he intuitively started doing that.
I thought Alice telling him that was a little bit unspoken in that situation because he implies that Alice saw her phone and saw his messages. So I feel like there's a little bit of an unspoken moment where she sees the text message, realizes he's in trouble, and 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 must have told Jimmy in some capacity, this is he's in trouble, this is where he's going because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I mean, we're as an audience, we're not really clear what happened in that moment, are we? Like, I mean, he implies that, oh, my daughter is addicted to her phone, so I guess that implies that she's the
hmm
one who sees it, just
Yeah.
because she's like, oh, I better just look at my phone, snatched it off the top of the basket. But I mean, I was thinking like I'm thinking, did he see her phone lighting up and going crazy in the basket? And he's like, what is this? And then sees, a text from Lewis. And then he kind of like, oh, Lewis is texting you. And she's kind of like, oh, I need to respond to him or something. And he's like, I'll take care of it. Don't worry. Like I could see that happening too. Him saying, no, I got this. Like I need to talk to him.
That's why I was a bit unclear as far as Alice being the one that saw the phone because when they show the phone going off, I kind of had like a intuitive sense that Jimmy was going to be the one to see the phone. So when he said my daughter's pretty addicted to her phone, that kind of threw me off. I'm like, I was really expecting that Jimmy was the one that went to the basket and saw like, oh, Lewis texted you. What's going on?
Yeah, and because in that moment when they have like a close up of the phone in the basket and like the text message going off where he says like I really need a friend right now, or he says something like that to her. And you can see like in the background, the phone is up close and she's kind of blurry in the background. They're all having a damn good time in the background sitting around talking, so you get the impression that she doesn't see the phone. And
Oh,
that's
I
why you're
thought
worried because, you see that he's distraught. She's not answering his text message. So you're like, oh shit, what's going to happen?
I thought that was a total setup. The fact that they're lost in bliss and glee right now, and this guy's gonna jump in front of a train. Like
Uh,
I thought that was totally like this is happening completely unbeknownst to this great moment everyone else is having.
yeah, I was really worried there for a second. I was like, this could go very terribly. But then like when I saw that it was like not only a happy ending, but that it was like, you think of how mad Alice was at her father for being like, you could help him.
Hmm.
He had gone to Jimmy's office and asked for help in the beginning of the season. So she was
Hmm.
mad that he wasn't willing to help him because he's the person that could. And then, with Jimmy's struggles, with what he's struggling through, like they are the unlikely duo that could help each other. So like it was great that they actually found each other at the end, and like you had that feeling of like, okay, it's going to be okay. They're talking about the people that they're watching, and it's going to be okay. Like they're going to have, maybe not even helping each other, maybe they're going to have a legitimate friendship out of this. And and then also Alice has legitimate friendship with Lewis out of this.
That's why I'm unsure what they would do for a potential next season because uh I like him jumping in front of the train. I thought that would be what would catapult another season because
Right.
you've got guilt from Alice not seeing her phone. You've got guilt from Jimmy or guilt from Jimmy like he's the reason why this guy killed him because he wouldn't let him have a relationship with Alice and Brian.
Mm.
Uh, and then of course that goes back to his fear of failing his daughter. So like I thought that was going to be the catalyst for the next season, which I have absolutely no idea where they're going to go now.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that it's really getting into its groove, it's nominated for some Golden Globes. So, I mean, I can't see why it wouldn't be renewed for a third season. And
I would love it
I
if it
would,
was.
yeah, I would love it if it was. My guess is that, because it's a Bill Lawrence show, because we saw shows like Ted Lasso, have a expiration date where they're like, we don't want it to go on for 6, 7 seasons and get bad. Like it has a time and it's gonna run out. Like I could see that being a thing. Maybe they only have it in their minds that there's only a timeline for it to be around for 3 or 4 seasons. Like that's fine. I sort of wonder. I mean, obviously, I think we can see a deepening of Lewis and Jimmy's relationship, but I mean, what other things are we going to see? Obviously, we'll see Charlie and Brian have their baby. Liz is going to take over as the nanny. Where we might see a possible full-blown relationship with Gabby and Derek, like getting serious. Um, I
Jimmy
wrote,
and Robin.
yeah, maybe he'll reach out to the woman who he bought the Mini Cooper from. Maybe I said, is there going to be serious between Sean and Paul's doctor?
Yes, at least from a
Um,
comedic sense.
yeah,
Keep
so
kind
it's
of
like,
hangs
I
over.
mean, we kind of have these small issues that are not totally resolved, but I'm not sure how how long they can drag them out. Like, what one thing that comes to mind is Gabby's a little bit strained relationship with her mom now that she's kind of stepped back from doing that. But then Derek brought her mom there at the end. So that kind of sewed that relationship up a little bit. The only thing that I'm thinking that could be a very dramatic turn in a third season would be seeing Paul's illness get much worse.
Yeah. And it winds up being an emotional detachment of who's going to take over the practice, and is he going to go to Connecticut to live with his daughter, so that, like, stuff like that. But like this, like you said, there's so many things that they put a nice little bow on. If as much as I would love to see it continue, because I love the show and I love the characters, if this was I wouldn't feel like anything was left unfulfilled.
Yeah, not really. It was I'm just kind of wondering for the third season what would be the main source of like conflict. And I think that's the only solution, is that obviously, illnesses like Paul's inevitably get worse. They don't get better. So I would assume that it might be him like making mistakes. It could be that like his patients don't want to say anything. It makes it awkward with his coworkers who like don't want to point out that they think that he's like not good to work anymore. It could be that that's where the conflict comes in. But yeah, it's just kind of trying to guess about what the conflict would be.
Yeah, I feel like season 3, from a writer's perspective, it's almost like a what could we do instead of what do we have to do.
Yeah. I think they have some possibilities, but as far as hopefully there's not much more ugly crying in store for me in season 3. I couldn't deal with it. It was too much for my heart.
All from a comedy.
Yeah. If we're not too much for your heart, if you enjoy listening to our show, we would appreciate it if you gave us a 5-star review and let us know what you think of each episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at redandredrealreviews@gmail.com. Also, make sure to follow along with us on Instagram and TikTok. He is Nutmeg, the number 2 Palmetto on both platforms. I am Binge the Ginge with dots between the words for Instagram, not for TikTok. As always, you can find video episodes on YouTube and Rumble, and stream us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. For the next episode, we're digging into the dramatic world of oil in West Texas for Paramount's Landman, which, if you're keeping track, is another Taylor Sheridan show we've covered.
We stay up on Taylor.
Yeah, we're really just, every single Taylor Sheridan show that comes out, we're just waiting in line for it. That's how we roll. So tune in for that soon. Until the next Real Review, Red and Red signing out.
In less than an hour, aircraft from here will join others from around the world.
Don't act so surprised, Your Highness.
Hey guys, you ready to let the dogs out?
What? Do what?
No. Try not. Do. Or do not.
Because I don't want no scrubs.
Let the dogs out, like, who let the dogs out? Who?
Who brought this guy along?
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this shit.
One more thing. Do me a favor. Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'll take care, all right? None but love for you. None but love for you.
Have any clue what's about to happen to him?
Oh, not a chance in hell. Good night.
Blow up! Peace! Smile, you son of a... You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
Hey, you
It's not funny anymore.
TLC references.
Still, nothing. I swear to you.
But as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.